Regardless of one's views on recreational drugs, most people can at least understand how addiction develops. After all, the fundamentals of addiction remain the same, whether the subject is drugs, alcohol, gambling, or even extreme sports. The individual suffering becomes trapped in a constant search for that elusive endorphin hit that was experienced the very first time. Even when drug carries the potential for negative trips, it's easy to see why the gamble might seem worth it. In fact, the inherent risk can even contribute to the overall excitement. But imagine a drug that consistently delivers only negative experiences. Why on earth would anyone choose to take that? Well, it's time to explore this paradox as we delve into the bizarre world of Datura. As everyone watching knows, you don't have to search far online to find how-to videos on just about anything, and psychedelic drugs, absolutely no exception. There's a thriving community of people who have invested real time and effort into calculating how much of a substance might be needed to achieve certain effects. Of course, this is not an exact science. Different people react uniquely to various chemicals, but for beginners or anyone trying something new, consulting a database of real experiences is a good starting point. One information source held in high regard by fans of altered realities is psychonautwiki.org. Although the site is often maligned for allegedly encouraging drug use despite its for educational purposes only disclaimer, it does take significant care to inform researchers about the risks involved. And here is what it has to say on the subject of Datura. Datura is extremely dangerous and can directly cause severe injury or death. It is highly unpredictable and it is strongly linked to psychosis and death. If including the word death twice in the first two sentences isn't enough, and you need a bit more context, consider that the site's fact sheet on heroin warns of the chance of a fatal overdose, yet doesn't actually use the word death at all. When an easily available, and in many places perfectly legal substance is ranked as far more dangerous than heroin, and even the most ardent proponents of hallucinogens go out of their way to urge people not to take it, you know that you are dealing with something truly alarming. So before we delve into the trip potential, let's take a look at just a few of the many physical health risks. Aside from the risk of death that was mentioned earlier, twice, Datura can also cause respiratory depression, a suppression of the body's natural breathing reflex, nausea, physical fatigue, muscle cramps, increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, erectile dysfunction, seizures. These side effects alone should serve as a strong warning against its use, yet it appears to be the psychological effect that most deter individuals from taking it a second time. Although Datura is slightly chemically addictive, there are only a few recorded cases of addiction, and these reports strictly anecdotal. So, you might be wondering, what does it do to you? After all, many people experiment with hallucinogens to experience a pleasant detachment from reality, often accompanied by vivid visuals. What may someone expect if, for whatever reason, they ignored all the warnings of death twice and decided to take Datura anyway? Now, this concept should be clear from context, but just in case, object activation refers to ordinary items such as cups, furniture, rugs, and so on that appear to move on their own. Sometimes this phenomenon is quite benign, like your coffee cup tilting or sliding across the table by itself. However, in cases of Datura, these activations are often reported to be far more intense. Users have described doors that open and close by themselves, knives that suddenly fly across a room, and in one particularly memorable account, a rug that sprang to life, sprouted claws, crawled across the floor, and shredded the family dog. Now, the human brain is an incredibly complex system, and it doesn't always interpret visual data accurately. Even a perfectly sober, slightly tired person might occasionally glimpse a shadow in their peripheral vision, only to find that when they look directly there, there's nothing. Now, imagine if this happened to you, except that when you do look directly at that shadow, instead of there being nothing there, there's a fully formed black cutout of a human being standing just a few feet away. If you're lucky, this shadow person won't do anything at all, they'll simply vanish after a few seconds. However, the actions of these perceived entities are really limited only by the scope of your imagination, and a frightened human's mind is capable of conjuring some truly unsettling possibilities. According to one account from an individual who claims to have spent several days under the influence of Datura, quote, "I was lying in bed, trying to calm myself down, when I became aware of a shadowy face outside my window. When I turned on the light, the face vanished, only to reappear as soon as I turned it off. I watched in horror as it pushed through the glass and floated toward me before disappearing into my own chest." That's worth noting that shadow people are a fairly common occurrence when experimenting with hallucinogens. In most cases, they either vanish when looked at directly or remain stationary. While this can occur with Datura, these entities are far more likely to become animated or seem to interact with the physical world. They aren't always merely vague humanoid shapes either. Although shadow people is the most commonly used term, these phenomena can take the form of animals, orbs, or even disembodied limbs. Internal hallucinations are best described as waking dreams. An individual, under the influence, might experience anything from mild visual distortions and intriguing patterns to the most horrific nightmares. However, these hallucinations occur when the eyes are closed, and they closely resemble standard dreams. While they can be unpleasant at times, the person is generally aware that these experiences are happening solely in their mind. External hallucinations, on the other hand, somewhat different. Depending on the amount of stimulant consumed, the phenomenon occurring around, or in some cases directly at the individual, can feel startlingly real. Now, much like those visual effects where something that isn't there briefly appears in your peripheral vision, most of you have experienced time distortion in one form or another. How many times have you sat at work on a Friday afternoon watching the clock as it seemed to take an inordinate amount of time to tick away the last 10 minutes of your day? Conversely, how often have you settled in for a quick beer with a friend only to glance at your watch and realize that 5 hours have passed? Our perception of time is relative to what we are currently experiencing. Now imagine taking this to the extreme. Imagine a chemically induced trip that in reality only lasted a few hours but felt like several days. If you're having a good time, that's probably not a big deal. It may even be considered a benefit. However, as we are coming to realize, Datura rarely, if ever, works that way. One member of our team actually experimented with the substance, it wasn't me, in their youth, and shared a story about an exceptionally vivid hallucination. The experience was reminiscent of a classic movie scene in which someone is tortured for information in an abandoned warehouse. Despite genuinely believing that they had endured near constant agony for nearly 48 hours, the truth was far less dramatic. They'd merely been sitting in a desk chair with a set of keys in their back pocket for about 20 minutes. While this tale may have a slightly humorous ring to it, the reality is that such experiences can be deeply and psychologically damaging. So now that we've covered a few compelling reasons to avoid Datura, it is time to explore what it exactly is. So, where does it originate? How can you recognize it? And despite everything we've discussed so far, does it have any practical uses? So, there are 9 plants in the Datura family, with the most common being Datura inoxia and Datura stramonium. If you come across one of these plants in the wild, a fairly common occurrence in regions like Asia and Central America, the first thing you might notice is the flower. According to iNaturalist.org, the flowers have a pleasing odor, resemble trumpets, and are white or creamy in color. While the leaves and stems do contain mind-altering chemicals, the highest concentrations are found in the flowers and the seeds within the fruit. In particular, the seeds contain significant amounts of scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and atropine. Now, we understand that not everyone reading this is a medical professional or a drug expert, so let's take a quick look at what these substances are. We'll begin with scopolamine. Scopolamine has several medical uses. It's most commonly prescribed to prevent motion sickness or to act as a nausea suppressant during surgery. However, it's usually only issued in very small amounts, and its complete safety remains a subject of ongoing debate. This compound also has many medical applications, several of which are highlighted in this brief extract from medlineplus.gov. Hyoscyamine is used to control symptoms associated with disorders of the gastrointestinal GI tract. It works by decreasing the motion of the stomach and intestines, as well as reducing the secretion of stomach fluids, including acid. Hyoscyamine is used in the treatment of bladder spasms, peptic ulcer disease, diverticulitis, colic, irritable bowel syndrome, cystitis, and pancreatitis. Now, there are 2 important points to note here. Firstly, all of the sources we consulted specifically advised against taking scopolamine and hyoscyamine together. Secondly, the list of overdose symptoms includes headache, dizziness, dry mouth, trouble swallowing, nausea, vomiting, blurred vision, and hot, dry skin. If you examine the list of minor side effects caused by Datura, you'll find that each one of these symptoms appears in almost exactly the same order. Given that Datura seeds contain a significant amount of hyoscyamine, it's not unreasonable to suspect that users may inadvertently overdose while chasing an altered reality. Now, this of course remains our conjecture, as such side effects are fairly common. Atropine is another prescription-only drug used, among other things, to treat insecticide and mushroom poisoning. As you might expect by now, it's strongly advised not to use it in conjunction with the other substances mentioned. The primary reason these drugs should not be taken together is that, to varying extents, they can either reduce the production of or inhibit the effects of acetylcholine, a chemical that plays a vital role in your body. Since we've already covered considerable medical terminology today, we'll keep this explanation brief. Acetylcholine is crucial for the proper functioning of the autonomic nervous system, which controls all automatic bodily functions such as digestion, tear production, and bladder function. When your body doesn't have enough acetylcholine, perhaps because you've eaten seeds containing 3 separate inhibitors, it begins to exhibit many of the symptoms associated with Datura use, such as vivid hallucinations and detachment from reality. Based on this information, it appears that we may have finally cracked the case of Datura's rather brutal symptoms. If you recall from the beginning of this episode, we mentioned that almost everybody who tries Datura, they only do it once. However, apart from the most reckless thrill seekers, there is at least one exception to this rule. For thousands of years, Datura has played a significant role in various spiritual and religious rituals around the world. Many Native American tribes used, and in some cases still do use, Datura as part of a concoction consumed during male coming-of-age ceremonies. The resulting visions are believed to be messages from spirit guides, which the child must interpret in order to gain wisdom. Furthermore, there are shamans and medicine men who regularly take Datura, believing that the internal hallucinations it produces can help diagnose patients, allow them to visit other spiritual planes, or even converse with the dead. Even these experienced practitioners advise against its use for the inexperienced, as there are simply too many variables at play. The potency of the seeds can vary dramatically depending on factors such as strain, location, weather conditions during a given year, and time of harvest. As a result, even those who have spent their entire lives studying its effects and determining the proper dosage cannot be completely safe. And look, we know in other videos we've provided much more detailed guidance on how psychedelics can be prepared and utilized. However, we're not going to do that today simply because we can't, in good conscience, be responsible for anyone attempting to use Datura. Yeah, remember the thing about the guy thought he was being tortured for 2 straight days. Yeah, and look, such information can be found with a quick Google search, and the substance is completely legal in many countries. However, the potential risks, both physical and psychological, are simply not worth it for an almost guaranteed bad trip. So look, don't try Datura. All right? Thanks for watching.